events, you feel like you need to refer somebody to today's webinar. So good afternoon, welcome. My name is Michelle. I'm joining from Maskwacis, Waskagan, Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. I've lived here for about 22 years. My homelands are in Treaty 4 territory. I'm a Saskatchewan girl. That's right. Anyone from Saskatchewan that's joining us today, let's give a shout out to, that beautiful province. So welcome, welcome. I hope your day is going well. You've joined Can Do Links to Learning. We're honored to be here every Tuesday, except this is our last Tuesday of 2022. And we're honored that you've decided to just press pause in your world to come in and take in today's webinar. And I always like to create this moment, create space, create an opportunity to acknowledge Creator, to acknowledge the gift of being present in Creator's world, that we are able to walk, our own truth, our own path. We can honor, ourselves, our spirit. We honor the ancestors when we walk well, and when we do well, we honor Creator. We honor this land that has been given to us. So just taking a moment to take a deep breath in. Maybe this is, it's that season where we're just busy and it's go and it's hustle. So maybe just take a deep breath, close the eyes. Just think about one thing that you're grateful for today, that you found along your journey today when that sun rose in the east. What was one good thing? And it could be something as simple as, drinking water. It could be something as simple as standing outside on the land and taking that deep breath and knowing that we're not alone as we walk in Creator's world. So we give thanks to Creator for all of the gifts that have been given to us. There's a Cree word, and I'm not fluent in Cree, but I always think it's important to try miopamatsu, in that good life. We have been given so many gifts and resources and tools that help us to walk this good life in all that we do. And today, Can Do, our Links to Learning webinar, it's really helping us to help us to walk that good life in our work and what we do for employment, what we're doing with community in our nations. So we give thanks for all of these resources Creator has given to us. Hi. Okay. Also, I want to note, you should be receiving an evaluation link after today's webinar. So this is the last one of 2022. So fill that in, and I believe your name will be entered to win. There's a Visa gift card up for grabs. So once you submit that evaluation link, your name will be entered to win. And so I think that draw will be done at the end of the week. So we love to hear you, and we love to hear your feedback. All right, let's get started. Yeah. All right, so we got the wonderful Grant Bruno, who is nehiyawak, Plains Cree, and a registered member of Samson Cree Nation, who's going to talk about evidence-based decision-making and Indigenous communities. So Samson Cree Nation is one of the reserves that make up Maskwacis, so Bear Hills in Alberta. He is a PhD in medical sciences, pediatric student at the University of Alberta. He is a father. 2 of his children are on the autism spectrum, and his PhD research will explore redefining autism from a nehiyaw lens, gathering stories with families and individuals who have experiences with autism using a strength-based approach. So Grant's research, I think this is really important. So I'm just going for it here. Grant's research experience includes quantitative and qualitative methods, community-based participatory research, as well as the use of decolonizing methodologies. All of that is so important, so valuable. So we honor you. We honor the journey that you're on as you are advancing your own self and your own education. So thank you for being here. So a little bit about today's webinar. So Indigenous leadership and governance, make decisions that affect the entire community. So it's so important that they have good, sound process for making important choices. So evidence-based decision-making is an approach that prompts governance and leadership to use quantitative and qualitative data to develop informed plans. I think that is excellent, and so important. So if you're considering implementing this approach for Indigenous communities, in today's webinar, it will be defined evidence-based decision-making and explain how it works, share why it's important, and offer some tips that can help you use this method effectively with and for Indigenous communities. So you're going to walk away from what I'm reading right here with some tips, with some how you can implement this into your practices and into your work. And I think that that is valuable. So Grant, thank you so much for being here and joining us. There will be opportunity, everyone, for questions or comments or dialogue at the end. Feel free to use that chat box throughout today's presentation. I will make note of all of the comments. If you're anything like me, I'll have like something brilliant to say, and then I lose it, 5 minutes later. So whatever you have to say, any questions you have, put them in the chat box along the way, and we will be sure to get to them. So welcome everybody. This is a beautiful opportunity, a beautiful moment where we can learn, we can be inspired, and we can, build our own capacity. All right, Grant, I'm passing this virtual mic off to you.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I definitely appreciate that introduction. It's one of the best ones I've had all year. So so today I'm going to be, I'll be talking about evidence-based decision-making in Indigenous communities. My background as a researcher, I've been heavily involved with I would argue, the knowledge creation portion of evidence-based decision-making. So being able to work in community, to be able to, do surveys, go do interviews, go work with, leadership and whoever else might want to talk to me. And the one area that I'm really working on, and I'm going to kind of outline this as I go, is I would really love to see what I'm doing here in the evidence creation to start being applied, right? Especially in community, whether it's an organization, it could be some sort of institute, or even at the individual level. I believe these concepts and ideas and processes are applicable. I really, truly believe that when it comes to decision making, there's really two things I think that happen in community right now, and I'll touch on these a little bit later. But I worked in Enoch Cree Nation for 2 years in the band office. Actually, I was Chief Billy's communications guy. This is just after I finished my master's, and I learned a lot. It was definitely an experience, and something that, a lot of things I took away from that was the ability to navigate in the Indian system, but also really getting great insights into how these decisions at the executive level get made. And from what I could see, a lot of it, unfortunately, can be very gut feeling, right? Like, you have people with decision-making authority, and they're often taking in different types of evidence, whether that's anecdotal, it could be something that's more politically motivated, and then they make a decision for the entire community based on that. And one thing that I was always trying to advocate or argue for was, we need to start getting our own stats, we need to start getting our own data, we need to start getting our own information, and using both. I think in an ideal world, you use both. And that way, and I'll touch on this too, you can make better decisions overall for the community that really help and benefit from the community. But before I get into that, I'll just introduce a little bit about myself. I often tell people the reason I do this, it's not who you are, but whose you are. And so I can actually trace my lineage back to both Papa's Chase on my dad's side. My dad's a Bruno. If you don't know anything about Papa's Chase, it was a reserve that was illegally surrendered in the early 1900s. And so my family actually lost their status, kicked off their land. And eventually, my grandmother married my mushum, or my grandfather, and she was from Samson Cree Nation. So she was a lightning. So a lot of you probably know Danielle. Danielle is definitely a relation. And so I'm related to the 6 Mile Lightnings out in Maskwacis. And then on my mom's side, I'm actually can trace my lineage back to Mr. Masquat, our Ogimau, our chief big bear. So his son, Little Bear, he had, I think it was 8 daughters, and one of those daughters actually married into Maskwacis, and she married a cut knife. And so that's my mom's side. So I'm related to the cut knives, the Brunos, and the Lightnings. And I'm only learning these things as an adult. I didn't grow up with my culture. My mom went to residential school, Hobima Residential School. Both my grandmothers went to the same school. And so a lot of that, intergenerational knowledge and tradition was actually cut off right then and there. And so as an adult, the more I learn about my own ancestors and my own history, the better work I'm able to do, because I understand exactly where I'm coming from. And now I know how to be able to navigate the systems that are in place today. As mentioned earlier, I am registered to Samson, but I grew up in Enoch. So my mom's a registered member of Enoch Cree Nation, which made things interesting for me for sure. When you live on a reserve where you're not a band member, you can often feel left out and isolated. But at the same time, I know that those in Enoch definitely appreciate the work that I'm doing, because a lot of the research I do is definitely community-based, and I'm really mindful of making sure that whatever research I'm involved with, it benefits the community first. And that's the ultimate goal. And so as I'm kind of going through my own research journey, PhD and things like that, I'm always looking for opportunities to give back. So just a little bit more about myself. As mentioned, I have 4 children. 2 of my children are on the autism spectrum. My sons, so Marshall and Anders. I absolutely love being a dad. It's my favorite thing. It's the reason I do anything, the reason I started a PhD, the reason I went to school, the reason I get up in the mornings is so that I have to become a better father every day. And so my research is all around autism in Maskwacis and really learning the cultural understandings of autism. Now, I'm not going to stick in this area too much. I know that we got a broad audience who wants to learn more about evidence decision making, but I highly recommend that you start to reflect on how are we supporting those with disabilities in our communities, and unfortunately, it's not very good. I often tell people that disabilities in if you have a disability in a First Nations community, you're going to have a lot of challenges within that, right? So you have huge jurisdictional challenges, you have lack of understanding, you have no resources, you have poverty and all these different things that are contributing to a lower quality of life. And so I'm always advocating for those who might not have a voice or might not be able to make it to certain places and use their own voice. I often tell people that my children guide me. Like I said, the reason I started the PhD was for them. And I'm a firm believer in that, our children are gifted to us, right? They're the creator, as mentioned earlier, really gifted your children. That spirit actually chose you. And so for me, I take that really seriously. I often tell people that fatherhood is sacred. It's something that I try and live every single day. I'm also a first generation university grad. So first to finish my undergrad, first to finish a master's, and will be the first for the PhD. I won't be the last though. Obviously, encourage my own family and my own children that one day you'll probably go to university, and I'll be there fully supporting you, because it is not an easy ride. There's times where I felt like, quitting, or times where I felt like I was just overwhelmed and isolated, but I didn't. And I really leaned on the strength of both my community and my culture and my mom, actually. So my mom was a huge support. She was able to do things with her life that allowed me to do what I do. And so I use that as motivators. So I've been conducting community research in Maskwacis for about 7 years, and I'll get into the details of what that looks like. So again, always looking for opportunities to give back. And I find that research, any type of research, is a very foreign concept in our communities. Not a lot of people go to grad school, but when I start talking to leadership or people in the community about research and just the impact you can have, then people start to get interested, right? So, for example, there was a study done with the First Nations Information Governance Center that really looked at the populations of reserves in Alberta. And so what the government of Alberta was doing was they were using their own numbers And those numbers were highly skewed, and there was a lot less of them. And what that means for funding for education or healthcare is that they funded a lot less by using their own numbers. And this other study showed that we had a lot more people who lived on reserve than they initially thought. And right then and there, you can see there's a huge discrepancy between the two, right? And that's the power of research, is you can start to explore things and do your own research and build your own capacity. And then you can start arguing against these other types of, policies or lack of funding mechanisms with your own research. And it's something I'm constantly advocating for. Slowly but surely, we're, moving that needle a little bit, which I'm excited about, but there's a lot of work to be done. So there's really 4 questions that I want to try and explore today. And these include the defining really what is evidence-based decision-making? What are the differences between, or what are the different decision-making approaches where knowledge can inform decisions in Indigenous communities? Or what are the barriers to evidence-based decision-making and how can we overcome these? And then what are the ways we bring together different types of knowledge for decision-making? So just defining what evidence-based decisions really are. So it's an approach to commitment to identify and utilize the best theory and data available to make effective decisions. Now, right now, I would argue, like I had mentioned, it's very much a gut feeling type thing in our communities. It's individuals who maybe don't understand research or don't understand policy or don't understand the power exactly of what numbers or qualitative research can be. And what ends up happening is these decisions get made, but they're not really grounded in reality or fact. And you could put a big amount of resources into a decision, and those resources might not be being used the most effective way that you can. And that's where the data and the information come in to help inform those decisions, to make sure you can use those resources in really good ways. So this correlation does not equal causation. This was really pounded into me, and both in grad school as well as my undergrad. Just because there's a correlation between something does not mean that thing is directly causing that thing. And there's a lot of different factors, right? So life is very complex. There's a lot of unique influencers that could be affecting that one thing. And so the correlation between, let's say, for example, correlation between traffic and, the time of day is one factor. But then there's other, weather, or you could have, there could be an accident. There's all these other different influencers that are affecting that same thing. And so causation is a really hard thing to actually, it's a really hard thing to see and, really hammer down on. And so what you want to do is you want to start taking everything into account to make the best decision based on what you're seeing. So rather than saying the time of day is the number one thing that affects traffic, you could say time of day, weather, driving skills and things like that, and all these different contributing factors, that equals correlation. So these are just some of the studies that I've been involved with. The one I would really like to highlight, though, is the latest one, Mama Huitituan, bringing the camps together, perinatal healthcare providers and staff participation in Indigenous-led experimental intervention for enhancing culturally informed care. So again, this was a mixed method study. And by mixed methods, I mean, I combined both quantitative data as well as qualitative. And then you really want to do is paint a story. And so what we really wanted to find out was how does, when healthcare providers were part of this cultural intervention, so we brought them to a powwow, to a sweat, feast, and all these different things, how did that affect the way that they provide care for moms to be in the community? And what we learned was that it allowed them to build better relationships. They were more comfortable coming to the community. They were able to really see themselves as, part of the community rather than just an outsider. And this is good because when you're talking about evidence-based decision-making, what you can do is you say, we have this evidence here that shows when we invite healthcare providers to our community and we allow them to participate in our culture, they're able to provide better care for our moms. And so when you make that decision to say, guess what, what we're going to do is we're going to develop a program for these healthcare providers, you have evidence for that program now. So rather than just guessing or, using your gut feeling, now you have evidence to back that up as well. And so I've been, like I'd mentioned, very much a part of the evidence building. Now I'm trying to get into the evidence implementation, which is evidence-based decision-making. So there's all sorts of types of evidence. I talked about anecdotal evidence. So these are just stories people come up to. I would argue this is probably the most used evidence in First Nations communities. I often hear chief of council talk about so-and-so said this to me, or, we're hearing this over here. And there's very little backup to that. It's just very surface level. And there's ways you can structure this type of evidence to make it a bit more empirical or a bit more grounded in, reality. Like looking for themes, right? So you would collect it, look for themes within what they're saying, and then you can go from there. There's case studies, there's people that you can go talk to, there's consultants or experts in the field. And it's just a matter of combining as much of this evidence as you can for the best decision that you can make. There's also statistical evidence, so looking at numbers. A lot of people do surveys. In our communities, we do surveys. I see this quite a bit. But then when I actually go through with a kind of a critical lens on what that survey is, there's a lot of holes in that. And I have to ask myself, is like, what are they trying to get at here? What question are they trying to answer? Or are they just kind of guessing in that too? And so when you develop a survey, there's actually an entire process that you should be following, right? You got to go, got to pilot it, got to test it, got to make sure it's actually answering the question you want answered. And there's a lot of work that goes into before you just try and administer it. And it's that extra work, I think, that really is a big barrier I find when in our communities. It's like, why don't I could just develop my own survey and just go do this? But at the same time, that survey might not be actually collecting what you want it to collect. And if you were to put the work up front, you could actually see that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. There's also testimonial evidence, right? So, you own a business and you see a lot of reviews, and that's testimonials for or against your business. This is, I find, becoming a bit more problematic. There's actually people you can hire that will give you good reviews. And so you got to take any review you find online with a little bit of grain of salt, because that review could have been planted there by somebody and paid for. So I think the review process, and unfortunately, I was just reading an article when I was doing research for this, Amazon reviews. You cannot trust Amazon reviews at all. They are people that are being paid for, and they go in, literally their job is just to go do reviews, and that's it. And these people are usually from different countries, so they get paid a lot less. And they have review farms, they're called, which is hugely problematic. Textual evidence. This could also be called literature. So if you want to go out and look up academic literature, or there's business cases, or there's other types of texts, there's different books and things like that you can bring into your decision-making process, all of which is written. You can do analogical evidence, so looking at contrasting different types of evidence. So you might have statistical evidence over here, you might have a book over here, and then you're going to contrast the two. Empirical evidence is often academic, it's super academic. It can be overly academic, honestly. And it's often peer reviewed. So I didn't realize when I was reading some of the articles in my undergrad, how much time, effort, and work went into these little 10-page articles, right? So for me, it was 2 years of research and then 6 months of trying to get it published. And then my one article for the Mama Hutituan article was about $20,000 total cost. And you read it and you skim it and you don't even take into account how much time and effort went into that. And on top of that, I had to send my article to experts in the field who worked at an academic journal, and they ripped up my article completely. And then from there, I was able to get it published because they finally accepted a version that I was able to give them. So through that whole process, my writing and the information that I was sharing was reviewed by 10 people, probably all experts in the field. And then finally to get it published was, more experts in the field. And so the expertise that went into that one article was huge. And so that, to me, quote unquote, makes it empirical. So rather than me just writing something up myself and then sharing it with somebody, you have actually the perspectives of a lot of different experts in each and every one of these articles. And that's what makes it more generalizable. It makes it more, and more just grounded, I would argue as well. Then the other area would be gray literature. So this is often literature that doesn't get published. It could be a government report. It could be like a class paper or something of that nature. You got to be mindful of when you're reading this too, because it's not peer reviewed, you don't know really what the quality of the researcher is or the research. And so, being mindful of exactly being really critical of what you're reading in front of you. The other area that I would argue, and that's something I tell people to be more mindful of, is social media. It's a huge area. You get a lot of information through it, but be really critical of what you're reading. Don't just take everything at face value. Go look at who's writing it, what their agenda is. Maybe it isn't misinformation, right? And so there's, I think, a process that I think we can start to take to make sure that we're taking in as much evidence as we can. Because social media can affect your life, right? Like people make decisions based on what they've read in social media. And that, to me, is just another form of evidence-based decision-making, but the evidence you're using could be misinformation. And that, to me, is hugely problematic and does cause harm. And so the example there would be like, I know now in Canada, we have residential school deniers. These individuals probably have been radicalized in some way through social media. And so they've taken all this evidence, made their own belief system, and now they can't believe Canada did something like this. So they refuse to believe. And that, to me, they're making a decision to deny, what our ancestors and our family have been through. And so I tell people, like, we are in the age of misinformation. Just be mindful of everything you're reading on social media and be careful. So different types of research. So there's primary research. So this is data that is obtained during a study that's been conducted. Examples are surveys, focus groups, questionnaires. Primary research is very much, okay, I've went and collected my data and I'm the one that's done it. And I'm using that data now. Whereas secondary research is like, you have all these different studies and now you're trying to learn from each and every one of them. And then you're going to bring them all together at the end. For example, a review, right? So you reviewed all the studies, you've taken out themes, you've taken out what you've learned from it, and then you've synthesized it into this other document. Then there's qualitative research. So interviews, focus groups, stuff like that, quantitative stats, questionnaire surveys. And then mixed methods is bringing it all together. That, to me, is probably the most, I would argue that it shows enough of the story and enough of it can humanize quantitative research. But at the same time, I know a lot of academics, they don't think qualitative research is of any value. So I find combining them is usually the best approach. So here are just some of the barriers. Again, it can be really intimidating for our community, right? You have people who've never been to university. They could be in management positions. You could have chief and counsel who don't know anything about grad school or research. And then so you get an article sent to you, and this article can be very academic and have all this jargon. And that automatically just makes you want to shut down and be like, no, I don't want to be a part of that. And that happens. There could be a lot of mistrust or skepticism around evidence-based decision-making, because I find when it comes to this type of work, it can cause more accountability. And some people, unfortunately, in the community don't want accountability, right? They want status quo. They want things that have worked for them. They want things that aren't going to really rock the boat. And some people can, again, intimidate it as well as mistrust. And you combine the two, they feel like they're being under threat, almost like, oh, my job, I've been doing this job for 20 years. Who are you to say you have to come in and change things? There's also a severe lack of capacity. A lot of our members don't go to university or to grad school, and so they don't understand research. And so when you're doing this kind of work, I often tell people to look for opportunities to build capacity, right? So let's say you approach a community and you're like, you have this great idea. I want to give something back. And so how I've told people to give back is you create like a research assistant position or an intern, somebody who can gain experience at doing some of this work. At the same time, you're able to get what you need from the community, and the community can benefit as well. Just lack of interest or will, right? People just are okay with the way the things are. And I see that quite often. And so when you come in there, you like want to do exciting new things, people might work against you, unfortunately. It could be right in front of your face, or it could be behind the scenes. And so you never really know what you're going to get. But one thing I tell people is that if you're able to craft a valid and compelling argument for this type of work, those that are in charge should be interested in some way or another. Research and evidence gathering can be a very foreign concept. Again, you could also have too much evidence. You can get overwhelmed. And I'll use an example later, but like I was looking into like, what does a 4-day work week look like? And the amount of information you can get on that is unlimited. You have arguments for, you have arguments against, and you can pretty much craft any argument you want with the amount of information that's out there. And so I don't know if it's misinformation. I don't know if it's something that, corporations are doing or whatever else, but there's a lot of pushback right now against it. And you got to understand just the way things are working, because, you can almost get overwhelmed by it, which can cause people, including myself, to just like not even bother looking into it, right? Sometimes the evidence just doesn't apply. Sometimes you might gather something or have pre-made evidence that might not be applicable to your community. For example, for First Nations, even here in Alberta, we have a lot of remote or flying only communities, right? And so if you're trying to take evidence from, let's say, an urban community and apply it to a remote community, that just doesn't make sense, because their realities and what they're dealing with could be different than what everybody else is dealing with. And so it's also very, this is another one, it can be very slow and time consuming. And so if you're looking at the way things work now, people already can be overwhelmed in the community. They can be already taking on too much. There's a lot happening. We're still dealing with, colonialism and all the dysfunction from that. And so a lot of people are just like, I don't want to take extra things on. And on top of that, like I said, it took me 2 years to finish my one study, and that's a long time for somebody, right? And on top of that, like it was like a full-time job going through it. And so people see that and they're like, no, I don't want any part of that. Why would I? I have my own job to do, or, I have to go over here. And so if you're looking at opportunities, you always want to think about how are we making the opportunity the best fit for the community, and addressing some of these barriers as well. Here are the benefits. So this one's, I think, critical. There's just a more efficient use of resources. And the amount of times I've seen great programs in the community just kind of get pushed to the side because there's no reporting done. There's no interviews done, or people weren't really trying to learn from it. You have your program, great program, people are benefiting from it. And then a new manager comes in that says, no, I don't want to do that anymore. And so when you're trying to make that argument of keeping that program, you have to have evidence for that argument as well, because if it's just your word against theirs, that's the losing battle. And so if these programs are really good and they're benefiting the community, and they are, it's a really good thing to be able to have the evidence to make that decision to keep it going. And so when you're looking, and the other thing is like, there's a lot of mental health challenges in our community. Mental health is it's very pervasive. I think it's everywhere, but at the same time, a lot of our communities are struggling with, where do we put the resources to help with mental health? Do we do it in the health center, social services? Do we build our own treatment center? Do we just hire more mental health therapists? And you don't really know what you don't know until you actually engage the community and see what the community would want to benefit from the most. And so instead of just like throwing resources at something, you go and engage the community, you collect the evidence, and then from there, you're able to make a decision saying, the community has told us this, they want more mental health therapists. So that's what the route we're going to take. And then you're going to, in my eyes, you're going to have a much more stable and consistent decision-making as well. It does promote accountability, which unfortunately in some of our communities is not a good thing for some people. In my eyes, it's always good. I think anybody that is accountable to the community should be held accountable. So for example, let's say you have leadership making a decision, you have all this information and evidence that points towards one particular decision, but then they go against that and say, we've got to put it over here. Later on, you're able to say, if that thing fails, or if it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, you can say, we have this evidence that pointed this direction. Why did you go in this direction? And that's you being able to hold the leadership or whoever's making these decisions accountable. You can improve quality outcomes. So the quality of what you're doing is going to be improved because you're able to really strategize and make sure that whatever it is that you're doing is based in evidence and decisions. Shared learning opportunities. So another thing is our communities just aren't that great at record keeping. So if something's going really well, there's very, very rarely people keeping a record of that. And if it's going really well in this community, there's a good chance it might go really well in this community as well. And then they can share that. And so that shared learning thing is we could be learning from other communities in a really good way, but because we don't have our own evidence or our own capacity to build the evidence, those shared learnings get lost. It reduces bias or sometimes irrational thinking. So let's say you're just having a really bad day or bad week, bad month, and your decision-making maybe isn't as the best quality. You could always lean back on the data or the information that you're getting for the evidence, as well as biases too, because what's clear cut is if you're able to provide really good quality evidence, maybe the biases that you have towards something, maybe it refutes that and makes you make that decision not based on your own bias, but on what's actually happening there. And effective management of risks, right? All decisions, there's going to be some sort of risk. It's about applying what you know and what you can learn from the evidence to make sure that that risk is mitigated. And then the ability to align strategic goals. So let's say you have mental health. Again, in the community, mental health is a huge contributor to a lot of different health outcomes. But what we're not really talking about is the financial impact that has as well. People missing work, not being able to work, not finding employment just because their mental health. And so if you look at economic development, even getting individuals to the job is a challenge, right? And so being able to align both economic development with mental health, I think would be a really powerful and an effective way of making sure that they're both being taken care of. Because you can build as many jobs as you want. If people don't have the mental health, if their mental health's not doing good in the community, they're going to be missing work. There's going to be loss of, man hours and things like that. And so looking at it in a much broader perspective. So just a little bit about from data to action. So this could be like an approach or different steps that you can take for pretty much any type of question that you have. So the first one is asking. So really translating a practical issue or problem into an answerable one. So say you have a question about, well, if I create employment here, how are we going to make sure we have quality employees, right? So answering that is like asking the community, what kind of employment would you like to see? And what would make sense for you, right? Because there's no point to say you live on a reserve. There's no point in building something that has like you need high skill or high, specialized degrees for, because people are just not going to be able to fit that. And then from there, you can go systematically searching or retrieving from the evidence. And then you have to appraise that evidence to make sure it's trustworthy. And then you have to aggregate. So bringing it all together, and then you apply that, right? So incorporating the decision-making process and then bringing it all together, making sure everybody, all the stakeholders are on the same page, and then you assess. And then from there, you can say, for us, we would love to see, manufacturing or something of that nature in our community because that fits better with our community resources and the community human resources as well. And so really making sure that you're taking as much information as you can, and then making sure that you're taking that information and applying it to whatever decision you're making. I won't get into this, but this is pretty much the same thing. So selecting the best available evidence, systematic decision-making, and then reevaluating. This is another big thing is you can, after the decision-making, you got to make sure you're still evaluating what's happening with that decision, because, you can always make a better decision next time, or you can share those learnings among other people. And so the more we learn from each other, I feel like the better our communities are going to be. Here's an example. Indigenous tourism. We have the Bear Hills Casino and Travel Resort. It's already being built. I would love to see what kind of evidence that they've used to make this decision. It's a huge undertaking for the community. And from what I can tell, there was basically two options. There was, you could build it where it's being built today, which is on the highway, but the highway is only going in one direction. Or you could have built it closer to the overpass where you could get both directions. And for me, I would have loved to seen how they make that decision to build it there rather than over here, and what kind of contributing factors were all playing into that. And then on top of that, I know casinos are, communities find a lot of success with casinos, most notably River Cree and Grey Eagle, right? They're huge. In the community, they provide a lot of economic opportunities, which is great. And is that the example that they're trying to go after? Or is it going to be more like Stony Nakota, Eagle River, or even Grand Villa, right? So the Rogers Casino, which has to close down some days because of lack of people going to it. And so there's a lot of different contributing factors as well as evidence gathering that should have been, brought out by all stakeholders, by Louis Bull, which is where the casino is going to be, AGLC, the Alberta government, and I think even like other communities as well, right? And so it'd be really, I would love to see is like, what were the evidence that was being used? And was the evidence of quality? And then when the decision was made, was it being assessed, I guess? And on top of that, you have a whole nother layer to this. I was actually just reading another article called Gambling with the Wendigo. And in it, he talks about how long-term, these casinos are actually worse for our communities than and better because they promote addiction, right? Gambling, drinking, stuff like that. And so there's all this interesting different factors that are going into just the casino. And my question always goes back to, okay, does the evidence suggest the Bear Hills Casino will be successful? I really hope it does at the bottom of my heart. But I think with something like this, only time will tell, right? Or is it going to end up being something that harms the community more than it does good? We'll see. So the other example is looking into like a 4-day work week. So there's a lot of evidence in this area too. There's evidence for and against. So the United Kingdom actually just had the world's biggest pilot on it. I think it was thousands of workers, and they looked at what does a 4-day work week look like in the UK. And what they found was that it promotes work-life balance and better well-being. It can actually cut costs. So some of the employees talked about how they would take a pay cut to work one less day a week. They say it's easier to attract talent and can support productivity. But some of the concerns was that there'd be lower opportunities for collaboration. And then they felt like maybe some of the work that was being done could be rushed. And so when you take into account, let's say you own a business and you're thinking about, okay, do we keep the 5-day work week or do we go to a 4-day work week? When you're thinking about that, there's a lot of evidence out there that looks at exactly that. And then it's up to you to make sure how you're kind of navigating all of that and then synthesizing it to make sure you're making the best decision based on, your type of business you have, or, the employees or whatever else. Just really quickly, we're talking about evidence-based decision-making. If you're going to want to work in our communities, here's some lessons that I've learned. I argue that you have to implement what I call the 80-20 rule. So, for example, I find like a lot of the media, academia, they often paint Indigenous communities in a deficit or as a problem to be solved. And so when you're looking and you're working with your communities, you have to be very opportunity focused, right? Strength-based. And so 80% of your time should be looking at those opportunities. But at the same time, like 20% could be like acknowledging the wrongs, right? I don't think for like trying to ignore them is the best approach, but making sure that you're not stuck on everything that's wrong in our communities, because there is a lot of opportunity, I find. Listen more than you talk. And even for myself, so I work in community, I'm from the community, a family community. I try and listen way more than I talk. And listening in my community, I was taught that, we come from an oral tradition. And I used to think like, okay, that means we told stories, we talked. And then the elders like, no, that means you listened. And it's something that I'm still trying to work on. So when possible, try and take a distinction-based approach. I know in my title, I talked Indigenous communities, but the more specific you can get, whether it's First Nations, Cree or nehiyaw, or whatever it may be, the better. Be mindful of othering. So I find a lot of people who come to our communities, they can have the best intention, but when you start talking about the Indigenous population or the this, or using that word, you're separating yourself from that person. And I find even the language you use is really important. Build capacity. Always look for opportunities, right? So wanting to get people involved with whatever work you're doing. It could even be the youth, right? So the youth really would love, I think, opportunities to do some of this work, to get some experience, right? Whether it's a summer internship or whatever else. And then you can go from community-based to community-led, because those youth are eventually going to take that work on. You got to really ask yourself, is my work challenging or reinforcing the status quo? Is something I'm doing here? Am I reinforcing those stereotypes? Am I bringing my own belief system into this? Or am I challenging that a bit, right? Because our communities are often framed in very specific ways by Western institutions, and our communities are telling a whole nother story, right? Like we talk about alcoholism is one of them. And there's actually a study done that actually showed First Nations people on average drink less than other Canadians. And so what we're seeing in our community, yes, we have a lot of trauma through colonialism, and a lot of our people are medicating that. And so they're in that extreme though, they binge drink. But the ones who do get sober, they're completely sober. And that to me is a beautiful thing and one of the strengths, right? And we're often framed as, alcoholics or whatever it may be. And so I'm really mindful of making sure whatever work I do is challenging what's happening in the community, because what's happening in the community is the status quo. And that right now isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. Allow communities to develop their own priorities and definitions. So you might have a really great idea, but the community could be dealing with something much bigger. And so when you want to work with the community, you got to make sure you're looking for opportunities to address multiple concerns. And last but not least, prioritize relationships. I think that's what it all comes down to, working in community. Relationships, maintaining them, making sure that you're, providing opportunities for the community to be able to, create and maintain those relationships. And that's everything. So hi. Questions or comments?
Ooh, well, thanks so much, Grant. That was very, very informative. It again is a huge reminder about, what the elder says, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth, and I'm guilty of this too, of talking and where I should be listening more, and also listening to the community as well. So you brought some good, rich knowledge to the table today. So we're going to open up the floor for any questions we have. Let me check the time here. We have about 10 minutes. So this is a good opportunity to ask any questions, perhaps even share a story, bring a comment in. I, for one, that Amazon, I was surprised because I will go to the reviews before I buy. And usually the reviews are pretty outstanding. So that was one that I hadn't even considered. And so that was, I will keep that in the back of my head for next time I look at those reviews with Amazon. Interesting. I didn't know that that was a whole, economic field, I guess, if you will. All right. Okay, so Bonnie has a question. Could you please explain the paternal awareness and how to look for it in meetings?
Yeah. Paternalism is like, I know what's best for you. I'm the expert. I'm the authority, and you have to listen to what I'm saying. I see this a lot in healthcare. You see it with education, and it's usually people who are being like authoritative, right? Like, I'm right and you're wrong, and they're not being very. And one of the things is listening again. Is this person? Do you feel heard when you're talking with this person? Do you feel like this person is acknowledging what you're saying? Or are they already coming up with, a response to kind of, and to look down on you? Essentially, that's what paternalism is like making sure that whatever authority they perceive they have is not being challenged. And if it does get challenged, then they, can take it out. So listening is a big one. Humility, if you're looking for somebody, because people who are paternalistic are usually looking for people who are obedient, and they're not willing to work with that person. They're just looking for somebody to kind of do what they say. Whereas somebody who's working, a leader or somebody in a community is working from humility, is talking with that person, is trying to come up with collaborative solutions. So those, I think, would be the two main things I would be on the lookout for.
That's a great question, Bonnie. We have another question from Geraldine. When you say evidence-based, are you mostly referring to Western-based research? And do you have any Indigenous-based resources that you can share?
And that's a great question. So when we think about a lot of the research that has been done on Indigenous people, it does qualify as a form of evidence. But at the same time, I know that when researchers come into the community, they're often out for themselves. They maybe aren't great listening. They're just kind of trying to get what they need, and then they're gone. And that happens way too often. And so I've been in the academy now, and I don't think I have the ability right now, just because I'm a PhD student. But once I'm done my PhD and get a bit more situated, a bit more grounded, I would love to start redefining what evidence is, and redefining it from the community, and asking the community what they want to learn. Because you're right, a lot of what I am talking about today, unfortunately, is Western based because of the lack of capacity, and our communities just don't know how to do the research yet. And so I think the more we learn how to do that, we can start redefining exactly what evidence means to us. For example, for my master's, I developed a community-based survey. So rather than using a pre-made survey that was made for a whole other community that would not have fit, I went and did scoping interviews. And then from those interviews, I took out themes. And then from those themes, I made a survey. And so I took that survey and I brought it back to our elders advisory committee. And then they went through it. And then we kind of went through each question to make sure it fit. And then, so for me, that survey really reflected the wants and needs of the community. Whereas if I would have used a pre-made one that I just would have, showed up with, I don't think it would have had that same effect. And that to me is a way of building Cree or maskwacis evidence. And so I can share, I guess, that article, if that's something I can maybe share with, I don't know, who's in charge of this, Michelle, and then they can share with the group. But yeah, so I think we need to start challenging that status quo, is what I talked about in my presentation, because even the way that stats gets done in the community or outside of the community, I mean, might not fit what's actually happening in the community, might not fit what we want to need.
Wow, great. That's great. Okay, I think we have time for one more question from Larry, and I'm reading this out because for those who weren't able to join today's live webinar, when they're catching it on, later on the recording, they aren't able to see the chat box. So here is the question from Larry. During your research in Indigenous communities, what do you see as the major challenge? So there's no doubt a lack of trust towards outsiders due to our history with corporations and non-Indigenous peoples. That's a really great question.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge, is the lack of trust, even for myself. So if I'm in community, I'm very, mindful and careful of telling people exactly what I'm there for. So I try and be as transparent as I can. And on top of that, I tell people that I'm working with that I'm here to benefit the community. I'm not here to benefit myself. Yes, I'm getting a degree out of it, but through that degree, I can start building, disability services. I can start, the last thing we're doing is, our latest initiative is we're doing a parent support group for autistic, parents of our children with parents. And so we're always looking for those opportunities, because that's where you start to build the trust, is through action and looking for opportunities to act now. And so I'm always, even though I'm a community member, as somebody who has family and friends there's automatic that, okay, you're here from the university, and I have to be very mindful of making sure that my actions are actually following through with what I'm saying as well.
Great. I think that this question, and this is the last question, is really important. Again, from Bonnie, when there is paternalism going on, who do you talk to after to gain clarity? So in confidence or in a meeting, to move forward effectively. I think communication is so valuable, so important. So, and then I believe in navigating this is challenging when hoping for effective discussions. That's a brilliant question.
Yeah, and that's tough, because you want to go to maybe so say, for example, let's say if you're working for a department, somebody in that department is trying to be paternalistic, so you want to go to your manager. Maybe your manager might listen or might not. The challenge there is it might backfire, and I've seen that happen. What's up, buddy? And so you got to be really mindful of who you're talking to and exactly how you're kind of portraying it. I find, for me anyways, when I have conflict or something that needs to be addressed, I usually try and do it head on, but I don't point fingers. I'm not here to say you're doing this and this and this, because you don't know. For me anyways, I don't know exactly where that person may be coming from. And so I try and have it more in like a collaborative, or in a space that allows for people to just give their perspectives, with somebody in that space as well who could mediate. That would be my approach, but there's a lot of factors that I don't know about for this exact question. So.
Yeah, and it's a really great question, Bonnie. We appreciate that. And Grant, we just appreciate the knowledge that you brought to our table this afternoon. I cannot help but say we are cheering you on, just like our ancestors are cheering you on. We are cheering you on, and we hope much success as you continue this educational path for bigger things, for greater things that our communities and our families and our people need. So thank you for all the good work that you're doing. That article, yes, there's very much interest in receiving the article you mentioned. May I suggest you send it to Elsie, because Elsie's going to send the evaluation link. So somebody had asked about that evaluation link. Maybe if you haven't received it in previous webinars, just go check your junk mail. It might be in there. You also, I believe, will receive the deck of today's presentation if you want to go back and look through it as well. So much knowledge at your fingertips, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are honored that you are here. So this is our last Can Do Links to Learning in 2022. I feel like we ended this in a really good way with Grant's presentation. And so we hope to see you in 2023. Be well, take care, and always walk in that good way. Honor the ancestors, creator, your own spirit, the land, and all of our relations around us. So take care, everyone. We'll see you again.
Thanks, everybody.